And so, Mark, I guess we bring you in to help viewers at home understand, just how everyone's going to move forward here on this in a divided electorate. Some who thought, democracy was at stake, and others who have clearly decided to turn back to Donald Trump for myriad reasons. Economy we've talked about at length here, immigration we just talked about, and in Clark County in Nevada, in Las Vegas, Latino voters peeling away for Donald Trump in huge numbers, simply because of, and I don't say simply to talk it down, but because these are very real issues. But I think that they were driven, as Lindsay showed in the exit polls, by economy, cost of housing, inflation, very real dynamics that American families have had to deal with for many years now.
David, I'm with John Carl, who said it several times. This is the most spectacular political comeback in the history of our country. There's nothing even remotely comparable. Richard Nixon came back from a defeat in 1960 when he ran against John F. Kennedy. He lost a gubernatorial bid in California 2 years later, and folks were writing Nixon's political obituary, but he came back to win the presidency 6 years later. He has nothing on Donald Trump. Donald Trump, we all know, 2 impeachments, January 6th, the loss of the election, and 34 felony counts, on and on and on. But I think his success is echoed by 2 successful presidential campaigns in modern presidential history. One is Ronald Reagan in 1980, who constantly asked voters, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" and defeated Jimmy Carter resoundingly in 1980. And then 1992, when you had George H.W. Bush defeating the incumbent president Bill Clinton, and his political advisor James Carville reminding everybody it's the economy, stupid. And I think Americans truly believe that Donald Trump has a better economic strategy to move them forward. That is the motivating issue. And Donald Trump capitalized on it very successfully, David. But we simply haven't seen anything like this in the history of our country.
And how do the American people move forward, for those who feel so strongly that the outcome either way was going to be dangerous for the country moving forward?
This is democracy. This is what you have when you have folks voting in a free and fair election. There's been no greater disparity between candidates than you've had between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And you see almost a 50-50 split, nearly a 50-50 split between Americans. It shows how divided we are. That's no surprise. We've seen that. We know how divided we are. But this is democracy. And if you are an American, you have to accept the result of a free and fair election. And we have to figure out a way to come together in the wake of this very surprising, in many respects, decision by the American electorate, David.
Mark, what do you make of some of the exit polling and sort of the coalition, really at both sides, the way they turned out, who they voted for tonight? And I guess in particular, what we've been talking about is that Donald Trump, he definitely carved out, for example, again, in Clark County, Latino support in some of these urban areas, some of the different battleground states. But one other thing that he did that is quite extraordinary is that in all of these red counties in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, he upped the number in some of these smaller counties. But he did better than he did 4 years ago, in some cases, than he did 8 years ago, over and over and over again. And that added up over time.
And it's the patchwork of those rural communities, David, that really comes into play. You start bringing up the numbers by bringing in those rural communities one by one by one by one, and chipping away at the Harris lead in the bigger urban communities. It is a miraculous strategy, and it worked. They seem to get out there in numbers. Donald Trump waged a movement, just as he did in 2016. It surprised many at the time, and I think a lot of it was because he was so successful in the rural areas where he was largely uncontested by Kamala Harris, who was concentrating, I think rightfully so, based on the numbers, on those urban areas. But they got just enough in order to get a majority in these states. And just particularly surprising in the blue, what were the blue states, the industrial blue states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and it looks like Michigan. Wisconsin and Michigan look like they're going to go to Trump, just as they did in 2016, a very successful movement waged by Donald Trump, David.
Mark, let me ask you, it was an issue that Lindsay had brought up earlier, and it's one that will be talked about too, and that's the role of gender. And not only that, but this is now the second time the Democrats have nominated a woman to be at the top of the ticket, and also in this case, a woman of color. What do we have to take from that? I know it's so early; we still haven't even called the race yet tonight. But these are definitely part. This is all part of the race. It's part of who the Democrats have put at the top of the ticket. And does it say something about the willingness to sort of put a woman in that top role to be commander in chief?
It's hard to know, David, the reasons that people didn't vote for Kamala Harris to the degree that they might have. But it seems like that high and very hard and almost impenetrable, at least at this point, glass ceiling is difficult to crack. And there is no question that gender and ethnicity probably played some role in this. Just as we saw in 2016 that it played a role. Whether it plays, we continue to not be able to see a viable presidential candidate who is a woman, a person of color. That's hard to know. We obviously elected Barack Obama twice in 2008 and 2012, but it seems very difficult for a woman to gain the office of the presidency. We've had other nations do that. Other first world nations have elected presidents. For some reason, that has proved to be elusive for our country, David. So it's difficult to know whether it's going to continue to be an issue in the future. But I don't think there's any question that played some role in this. We'll know more as we analyze this race in years to come.
Mark, one of the other things that you had said earlier, waged a movement like he did in 2016. And in looking at this campaign, the Trump campaign also found ways to reach voters that were, not unorthodox, but new ways to get to them, podcasts. And I know Kamala Harris did this too, but we really saw it, from Joe Rogan in those final days, and then the Joe Rogan endorsement, and having voices out there, part of the political ecosystem that aren't sort of the traditional ways of reaching voters and finding them where they are and in what they consume, the sports that they like, the personalities they listen to during the day. And that seems to have been a very successful strategy for the Trump campaign.
And you're absolutely right, David. We have to remember Donald Trump is an entertainer. And I think he was very happy to go into these different mediums where he would find an audience, particularly, I think, in the end among white males. Finding podcasts they listen to. You mentioned Joe Rogan. There were others that he went to as well. But Donald Trump, wherever he can find an audience, he is happy to show up. And I think that was a winning strategy as well, not going to just the traditional media, but going to other things that we may not know about, but that draw a very sizable audience, not mainstream properties, but that got to the right audience for Donald Trump to get people to show up at the polls. I think you're absolutely right. I think those podcasts played an enormous role in Donald Trump's victories. Again, just working away at the edges, getting a few here, a few there. That's a sort of patchwork strategy that seems to have worked so well in ostensibly getting Donald Trump over the top and getting to that 270 plus electoral votes.
Working away at the edges and building it over time and performing perhaps in so many ways better in this election than he did in two previous campaigns. Mark Updegrove, his presidential historian, we really appreciate your insight always. Thank you for joining us this early in the morning. Appreciate it, Mark.